The sisterhood wound is real. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I'm continuing my Masculine Feminine Energies film breakdown series with Hannah and her sisters. If you're not familiar with what I mean by Masculine and Feminine Energies, I talk about this in most of my videos, but a brief summary. Masculine and Feminine Energies are energies that live within all of us. We all contain both energies. We all have a core energy. This is the one we're most ourselves in. This energy may link up with our gender. It doesn't have to, but it very often does. We can be wounded or healed versions of either of these energies. And each of these energies contains archetypes, and we all contain all of the archetypes, and we can tap into them whenever we need to. I have a lot of videos about the masculine and the feminine archetypes if you want to learn more. And in order to have sexual polarity in a relationship, you need one partner to be in the masculine and one partner to be in the feminine. These opposite energies attract sexually and same energies repel sexually. So in this video, we're going to look at Hannah and Her Sisters, which is a Woody Allen film. I want to state in this video and in all my videos, none of what I talk about in these breakdowns is a reflection on the actual actors, directors, writers, producers, or anything on their personal lives. It's just about the films and the energies within the film. I know I say that every time I do a Woody Allen film breakdown. I respect him as a comic. His personal life is quite questionable, and I have done an Annie Hall breakdown, and I've also done a Midnight in Paris breakdown. I do think it's a little odd watching some of his older movies, knowing more about who he is now as a person. Some of it can get a little cringy. I'm just gonna give you a heads up, but I am really just talking about the energies in this movie. And actually the reason why I picked this movie was just because I wanted to do something that had something to do with Thanksgiving, because I really do feel like Thanksgiving is kind of a holiday that gets overlooked. I mean, Christmas is kind of the star of the holiday season because it's the biggest retail moneymaker. And I feel like Halloween has kind of become this new like retail darling as far as being a moneymaker. And Thanksgiving kind of just sits in the middle as kind of the lost middle child of the holiday season. So I just wanted to do something that was Thanksgiving themed, and when I tried to look up Thanksgiving movies, this was the one that kept popping up. So I'm just gonna focus on a couple of the relationships and a couple of the energies in different characters in this movie. I'm not gonna dive into like the whole movie because there are a lot of weird storylines and paths that this movie goes down. So there's just a couple things that I want to touch on because I do think that they are some really great examples of some of the energies that I've been talking about. Now, Mia Farrow plays Hannah, and Hannah really is she's like the eldest sister in her family. Her parents are former showbiz stars, so she is really the backbone of her family. She's the stability. She has to be the stability for her parents, for her sisters. She is the masculine structure in her family. Hannah doesn't really ever seem to complain about it, but you kind of get the impression at some points in the movie that she doesn't feel like she can complain about it because this is just her role and she's accepted this as her role. Not gonna lie, I identify with Hannah a lot in this movie, and I'm sure that there are a lot of women out there who probably identify with it as well. If you're ever somebody who's felt like you needed to parent your parents, or you needed to be the responsible one all the time because everybody else was in chaos, but you were not allowed to be in chaos, that's actually a big blockage, I think, for a lot of women today. So many women grow up and they have to be the masculine structure in their family life, even as kids. So when it actually comes to becoming an adult and becoming a woman, and you want to tap into that feminine energy, you don't really have a great guidepost for that throughout your life because you've always had to be the masculine structure. And if you've always felt like you needed to be the adult, the mature one, the structured one, the one who had it together because everybody else was falling apart around you, it's going to be really difficult for you to be able to tap into the part of yourself that connects to that messy, wild, chaotic feminine energy. And it's also going to be really difficult for many women in that situation to be able to trust a masculine partner, because if a woman has been through that, and I can speak from personal experience here, if you become so grounded and confident in your masculine structure, the idea of somebody else's masculine structure actually being able to hold and support you, it's going to be a tough sell because you're going to be so trusting in your own. And it's going to be really difficult for you to be able to put your guard down and trust in another person. I identify with Hannah a lot in this movie, and I'm sure that there are other women out there who are in that situation who have that masculine shield up because you've developed your masculine structure so well because you had to. It was a survival skill. Nothing to be ashamed of. Most of us in our past are just doing things that we felt like we needed to do at the time to survive. life, especially when we're talking about childhood situations. So the important thing is to not shame yourself for having been in that situation, but it's knowing what it is that you want in the future and healing from the fact that you felt like you needed to be the masculine structure all the time so that you can actually let your guard down when a trusted partner comes into your life. So Hannah is actually on her second marriage. We meet her first husband throughout the movie, who is actually played by Woody Allen. He's Mickey, and he is the typical hypochondriac. You get a few glimpses into what their marriage was like, and I mean, Woody Allen plays the sort of like neurotic, covert, narcissistic, feminine energy male. I mean, he's kind of the quintessential version of that. In fact, if you watch my Annie Hall breakdown, I dive into that much deeper in that, so I'm not going to dive into that aspect of his character too much because Woody Allen plays Woody Allen. Like, he pretty much plays the same character in every movie. He's in Flo. They're married, but he doesn't want to make a commitment. She wants a family. They actually find out that he can't have children because they say his sperm count is too low, which these are energies, but they can be connected to your biology. The same way that a woman's connection to her feminine energy can actually heal a lot of her own hormonal imbalances and things like that. A man tapping into his masculine is actually very much connected to his hormone levels and stuff. So the fact that he can't have children, again, that doesn't mean that he's not masculine, or it doesn't mean he's less of a man, but there are a lot of indications that if somebody, male or female, is having a fertility issue, tapping into your masculine or feminine energy respectively can help with that. And that can usually be an indication if a woman's not fertile. It can very often be a link to her not being able to connect to her feminine energy, in the same way that if a man is having fertility issues, it can also be him having issue tapping into his like healthy masculine energy. I'm not saying that there aren't like medical, scientific, environmental reasons. Like, there's all kinds of reasons for it. I'm not saying that necessarily it's a one-stop shop kind of solution to these things. Fertility issues and things like that can you know, be very complex. However, there is an energetic element to them. So I'm not trying to dismiss anybody's, you know, health issues as saying, well, you just heal your energy and it's fine, but there can be links to the energetic issues and your actual health issues as well. And there's research on that as well if you want to dive into that deeper. It is interesting too how when they find out that Mickey you know, can't have children, they say, which you find out actually later on that he can actually have children, but that he has a very low chance of having children. Hannah makes a comment about like, maybe you're masturbating too much, and he makes some kind of a Woody Allen joke about masturbation where it's like, hey, I don't knock your hobbies kind of thing. I'm a big advocate of self-pleasure. Big advocate of it. When you have a man who is addicted to ejaculation, particularly if we're talking about masturbating to pornographic images, or, you know, like just that constant ejaculation, there's a lot of links between a man who ejaculates way too much and his depletion of his life force energy. And that's a topic I don't know a ton about, so I'm not going to make this video about that. There are a lot of other people who dive into that much deeper and know much more about like semen retention and things like that. I'm just going to touch on that. I do think if as a man, if you're finding yourself not stepping into your masculine, you find yourself really drained of energy, maybe you're having fertility issues or things like that, working on that aspect, if you're constantly addicted to, whether it be constant ejaculation from masturbation or constant ejaculation from just constantly needing to have sex or needing to have sex with different women or things like that, that's usually a sign that you've got some issues in your masculine energy, because a truly masculine man is not going to have that addiction. Think about it like this. The masculine desires freedom. He doesn't want to be constrained. He wants freedom from burdens. But if as a man, if you are essentially addicted to ejaculation or addicted to constantly finding a new partner, if you have that addiction is controlling your life. That's not freedom. Being able to hook up with multiple people or constantly releasing your sexual energy, like that addiction to that, that's not freedom. I think a lot of men confuse the idea of like being able to be with a whole bunch of women or you know, constantly having sex or something as being connected to their freedom. And the addiction to that is literally the opposite of freedom. So if you as a man are a slave to that biological function to need to ejaculate all the time, you're not really a free man. You're actually a slave to your biology and a slave to your addictions. So that's something to think about. So Hannah and Mickey end up having twins with artificial insemination, and then they end up divorcing, and Hannah ends up adopting more children, which is kind of parallels Mia Farrow in real life, and I think similar to the Mia Farrow Woody Allen relationship in real life, which I'm not going to dive into that. If you want to know more about that story, it gets really weird, so if you're not familiar with that, you can look it up and you can look into that because it gets bizarre. But anyway, this movie was kind of like a precursor to that, I'm assuming. So Hannah marries her second husband, Elliot. And Elliot's got issues. Elliot is madly in love with Lee, who is one of Hannah's sisters. I really want to look at the Elliot-Hannah relationship very objectively, but it's really hard for me to not judge Elliot for what he's doing because he really is a slime ball. So I want to, I want to state that nothing that I say about the Elliot-Hannah-Lee love triangle thing is at all defending anything that Elliot does in this movie, because I really do think that this is completely inappropriate. This idea of him like pursuing and then having an affair with his wife's sister, totally inappropriate. No question there. I do want to dive a little bit into the reasoning as to why that happened energetically. And none of this is to put blame on Hannah or even really to put blame on Lee, although she definitely has some things that, you know, are questionable as far as her decisions. But I want to discuss how this is energetically, not to defend their actions, but simply to talk about how this situation got so chaotic. Hannah is the structure, and she met Elliot, and it's actually implied in this conversation that they have that Elliot starts telling Hannah that she's too structured, she's so structured, and she's like, well, when we met, you said your life is in chaos, you said you wanted structure. Because Hannah is so much in her masculine, she's clearly attracted two husbands at this point who are very much in their feminine energy. They're in their feminine chaos. They operate from emotions. They have addictions. They don't actually have any grounded stability themselves. Hannah has just attracted essentially man children who, because Hannah's always been the parent, she's always been the masculine, the structure, she's attracting men that she has to mother. It's very common, right? Because opposite energies attract. So she attracts these men, but then the problem is these men are unstable. They're erratic, and because they're in their feminine energy, but that's not their natural core energy, they then turn to resent Hannah for her grounded stability. Because in reality, as men, they would be much better in that grounded stability. So they resent her for having more masculine energy than they do. And that's really what's going on with Elliot. Elliot was attracted to Hannah because she had that grounded stability that he wanted, because he didn't have that within himself. So that's why the two of them got together initially. However, because Elliot is actually chaotic and he's in his feminine, he's not grounded, he becomes attracted to Lee because Lee is even more chaotic and ungrounded than Elliot. So he then becomes attracted to somebody who's more in her feminine energy than he is in his, so that he can give himself a false impression that he is in his masculine, because compared to Lee, he's more grounded and stable. That's actually one of the reasons why, and you see this a lot, where you see a man who is with a woman who may appear to be like the perfect wife because she's got everything together, she is, you know, the structure, she's the matriarch of the family, and then the guy runs off with some woman who's basically like a hot mess. The reason for that is because that hot mess gives him a false sense of masculinity. He doesn't actually have to step that much into his masculine energy in order to feel more masculine than this overtly sort of wounded feminine woman that he's drawn to. He now gets to pretend that he's more masculine. Whereas with Hannah, she's got so much masculine energy and structure, he's never gonna out-masculine her. He just doesn't have that in him. He's not, I mean, could he work on it and could he get there? Probably, but he doesn't seem like somebody who really wants to get to that level. So he's never gonna be able to be more masculine than Hannah. So he now starts going for women who are essentially really wounded in their feminine, or, you know, weaker, so to speak, not because they're feminine, but because they just don't have their act together as much. So he can give himself a false sense of masculinity. Men like that are very toxic, and it's really important that we keep an eye out for those men, because they are eventually going to run around. They're the ones who are not going to stay faithful, because they're not the stability. As women, if we choose a man who's unstable, he's going to continue to be unstable. That's just how it works. Our stability is not likely going to inspire him to be more stable. We're gonna always then remain the stability, and he's gonna feel like he can just be more chaotic. Elliot pursues Lee. He does get more into his masculine when he is with Lee. He absolutely does. he pursues her. I mean, he really aggressively pursues her, like he is the hunter. Lee's in a situation where she is actually involved with this much older man, Frederick. He's an artist. He's kind of really out there, and you kind of find out that Lee is living with him, but he's in isolation because he's an artist, and he's sort of this Svengali that is much older and is really controlling of Lee. He refers to Lee at some points as like his connection to the outside world, like she goes into the outside world, and in that sense, in reality, like as much as I don't really love the idea of this much older man who is controlling Lee, because it is a very suffocating relationship, he is much more masculine in his structure. He's much more like, he's an artist, so he's kind of in flow, but he is much more like isolation in general, and that could be healthy or unhealthy, is more of a masculine quality. Lee is a little bit more sociable, so the idea that, I don't think that Lee and Frederick's relationship is healthy, but Frederick is a little bit more masculine, so Lee can be a little bit more in her feminine. The thing is that Lee even mentions at one point that their relationship isn't even sexual anymore, that Frederick is really just so in his mind and his art, so focused on that. Lee is kind of this muse for him, like he does a lot of artwork of her and things, but she's really kind of become almost like an object to him. That's not healthy. In fact, that's actually an indication that he's somewhat in his wounded masculine, and Lee is kind of in this wounded feminine of kind of just staying with this man because this is her comfort level. She's dependent on him for money, and they kind of have this, it's a wounded masculine, wounded feminine kind of dynamic going. I wouldn't call Frederick wounded masculine in an extreme case, and I don't think Lee is an extreme case of wounded feminine, but there is that like dependence on each other, that they're not really together because they love each other and are connected together. They're with each other because of this need. He has this need to sort of control her and use her, and she has this need to kind of be reliant and dependent on him, and she hasn't really stepped into her own. So their relationship isn't so much healthy, but I would say he is a little bit more in his masculine and she's more in her feminine, although there's definitely wounding there. Elliot comes in and basically is like pursuing Lee. Frederick senses it, Frederick notices it, he's not really very happy about it. Now Elliot really does become the hunter, which is very masculine. So he's now got this masculine mindset of pursuing his wife's sister, which is creepy, and not actually putting any effort into trying to better himself or his wife. He's actually pursuing her sister, but part of that is because Lee is so much more relaxed in her feminine. She's more floating through life, and Elliot has this false sense of masculinity about like pursuing her, being the hunter. He wants to give to her. Lee hesitates, but she's a little bit more open to his giving. You get the impression that Hannah is the giver. Like Hannah is the one that's always giving to everyone. So she's not open to ever receiving anything from anyone, and the masculine really desires to give. So when the masculine now senses that there's a woman who is open to what he has to give, that's where he's going to become attracted to. Not justifying the infidelity, but I'm saying that that's where the attraction comes from. Lee is much more in her feminine flow. She's more chaotic. She's more like, she wants to take college classes, but she doesn't know in what. She's just kind of flowing through life. So a man with this desire to have a false sense of masculinity is now going to be drawn to her because it makes him feel more masculine, and because she's open and she's receptive, she's more vulnerable. Those things then become very attractive to his inner masculine and bring that out in him, as opposed to in his marriage where he has a woman who is the masculine structure, so she doesn't need his masculine structure. Would she like it? Probably. We don't really know. We don't really know if Hannah would be comfortable with it, if that's the part of him that she got to see. However, she's really not open to it. I mean, you can tell that she's really blocked off from that. She won't even get any kind of help or anything, or isn't really open to anything from her family or anybody like that. So Hannah's very blocked from that. And again, I'm not justifying what Elliot is doing. I'm saying that's the reason why someone like him is going to stray with somebody who he really senses more of her feminine energy. There's a lot of interesting scenes. Elliot is really into like giving to Lee. There's a scene too where he talks in his head a lot, like we hear his thoughts, and he's talking about how he's gonna ask Lee to go, you know, I don't know if it's coffee or dinner or something, and to discuss things and everything. In his mind he's like, okay, well if she's not open and receptive, then you need to kind of be more nonchalant. Like he had this whole plan in his head about how he was going to pursue her, which was really inappropriate for him to be doing, and he knew that was inappropriate. But it's this idea of how he was going to pursue her, but he was gonna pay attention to her responsiveness to know how to proceed, which is great. I mean, that's what the masculine should be doing when you are pursuing a woman, to actually paying attention to if she is receptive to your pursuit or if she is not. If she's not open to you pursuing her, that's when you move on. And more men really need to understand how to sense that, how to sense when a woman is being open and receptive to him and when she's not. So when men talk about not being able to talk to a woman or pursue a woman, or a woman automatically thinks he's creepy, that happens when a man is not paying attention to whether or not a woman is actually being open and receptive, and his ego and his mind kick in, and he's like, okay, well, I'm gonna get her to want me, I'm gonna force her to want me, and like he's literally like projecting his desire for her onto her, and like he's gonna make her want him, as opposed to paying attention to the cues she's giving as to whether or not she's interested and stuff like that. So that conversation that Elliot's having with himself is actually really good. The problem is he doesn't listen to himself, and he just goes and kisses her, and it becomes this whole chaotic mess. Lee gets upset at first, but he keeps pursuing her. They end up basically sleeping together. Problem is, now Elliot has gotten what he wanted. Like he wanted Lee, he pursued Lee, he got what he wanted, he conquered her, so to speak. He goes back home to Hannah, and now he's racked with guilt. He's feeling like, no, I need to be with Hannah, because Hannah's stability, Hannah's comfort for him. Hannah's like the nurturing mother that can take care of him. So now his feminine side is like, hey, I want to be with my wife, and he's like planning how he's going to end things with Lee. He gets a phone call from Lee, and Lee basically is like, hey, I'm crazy about you, and she's now all in, because the feminine now, when she has a sexual encounter with a man, very often she now becomes attached. Her feelings are heightened. She had managed to block off her feelings for Elliot before they had a sexual interaction because she knew it was wrong. Now they've had a sexual interaction. Now Lee's emotions and feelings are all caught up in Elliot. She's all in, and now Elliot's like, oh, I don't know if what I did was the right thing to do. Chaos ensues. Reality is, Elliot wanted the chaos. Elliot's inner feminine wanted the chaos. He wasn't getting chaos from Hannah because Hannah's a structure. His inner feminine, when he's with Hannah, wanted the chaos and the drama. But when he got the chaos and the drama, he panicked and realized that he wasn't in the right situation. Lee's now emotional feminine energy is freaking out his feminine energy. That's what happens oftentimes when you have a man who really doesn't know how to be in his masculine. He is in his feminine, but he wants to be in his masculine because that's his core energy. That is going to be a chaotic situation. Both Lee and Elliot end up completely racked with guilt. They have an on again, off again thing for a while, but eventually, like, Elliot really gets frustrated with Lee and her chaotic feminine, because Elliot isn't really in his masculine, so eventually that chaotic feminine is gonna bother him in the same way that because he hasn't stepped into his full masculine structure, Hannah's masculine structure bothers him. Because Elliot is so confused about where his energy goes, and he's all over the place with his energy. He wants to be masculine, but he wants to be feminine. That kind of chaos about whether or not a man is in his masculine or feminine, he's in one and then all of a sudden he feels like he should be in another, and there's a lot of wounding going on. He's now got two women, one who's, Lee is really kind of in a bit of a wounded feminine in that she's really kind of lost and is really just looking to depend on a man. She's very needy. She's actually so needy for love and attention that she's sleeping with her sister's husband. He's attracted to this wounded feminine because it makes him feel more masculine, but he's got this wife who is his masculine structure because he doesn't know how to create the masculine structure for himself. So now he's got these two women on these two opposite extremes, and he doesn't know where to go because he hasn't really figured out himself which he is, which he's likely a masculine being because most men are. So if he doesn't work on healing that, he's going to constantly be, and he breaks off things with Lee, but it's just going to be another woman if he doesn't actually heal that within himself. Him just going back to Hannah isn't really going to fix anything. It's probably just going to happen again because you're going to keep repeating the pattern until you actually heal the reason why you went down that path in the first place. Holly is Hannah and Lee's other sister, and Holly is she's such a wounded feminine. Like, she is such the epitome of the wounded feminine. She's a former addict, and you get the impression that she is clean and sober, but she's still kind of like, she wants to be an actress, but then she switches and she's going to be a caterer. this and that. She's kind of all over the place. She's constantly borrowing money from Hannah because she just doesn't know whether she's coming or going. Like, she's really just really erratic and all over the place. There's actually an interesting scene where her and her best friend, played by a very young Carrie Fisher, meet this man who's an architect, who's this really classy guy, and both of these women want him. There's this whole idea of like, okay, who is he gonna drop off first? Because it's implied that whoever he drops off first is the one he doesn't really want. They end up deciding that he's gonna drop off Holly's friend first, and Holly's literally in the cab, sitting in the back of the cab. That whole conversation she has in her head, she's basically selling out her friend, like in her head. She's basically like making fun of her friend, and it's, oh, it's such a sisterhood wound. It's such a, like, this man comes into this friendship. The two women are now like competing against each other, which is very masculine energy for two women to be competing against the same man. That's very much masculine energy, that competition. She's in her head, she's basically beating herself up, she's criticizing her friend. Like, it's just, oh, it's so, I mean, most of us have been there at some point in our lives where we felt like we had to compete with another woman for a man's attention. Maybe we lost out, maybe we didn't, but it's that being in her head all the time, that just really putting herself down, and then she's got to put her friend down. Like, that's her whole ego conversation she's having in her head. When at the end of the day, like, this guy probably isn't really worth her time and energy anyway. She really just turns everything into being like somebody criticizing her because she's got such low self-esteem. It's interesting because you find out that after Mickey and Hannah divorced, Hannah actually set Mickey up with Holly. They show their first date, which was just horrible. Like, it was just awful. They didn't get along at all. And they end up meeting again later on when they've both kind of been through other things and been through a lot of healing work and stuff, and they end up kind of coming together. But it's interesting how Mickey makes the comment that, you know, while he was with Hannah, he was always very attracted to Holly, as if like Hannah keeps attracting these husbands who are basically these man children. She's the masculine structure and they're attracted to her because she's kind of like the parent. She's parenting them. But these men are always attracted to one of Hannah's like kind of erratic, crazy sisters. Because the erratic, crazy feminine that's very wounded can make a man who doesn't really know how to be in his masculine feel a false sense of masculinity. And that's obviously a pattern that keeps happening. So as much as like Hannah really has it together, so to speak, on the surface, everybody around her being such a mess is really just making Hannah's life even more miserable. Her husbands, her sisters, her parents. At one point, Holly decides she wants to be a writer, and she goes and asks Hannah for more money. And Hannah's like kind of trying to, she's very much a parent to Holly. She's kind of trying to parent her to get her to choose a path that might be a little bit more practical and reasonable, and like Holly just turns it into Hannah calling her a loser. Like Holly really does start projecting all her own insecurities onto Hannah, as if like Hannah's saying them to her, when it's really Holly who feels all these things about herself. She feels really insecure and she feels guilty always going to Hannah for help. She actually points out to Hannah later on at one point that Hannah's the one who's always giving, and she never lets anybody help her. And Hannah kind of acts as if like, well, what, you know, why would anybody help me? You can tell that Hannah's really not comfortable actually going to somebody else for help because she's used to having to be the one who helps everybody. Holly kind of resents her for that, but then at the end of the day, you kind of have to ask yourself, like, would Holly be strong enough to be able to handle Hannah if Hannah needed the structure to lean on? That can be a common thing, I think, sometimes in families, where the person who like has it together, or the person who is the adult in a family of children, or, you know, the person who is the mature one or the masculine structure, people can resent them for having that stability and being like, well, why don't you ever let your guard down and lean on us and trust us? However, usually that person is in that position of having to have that masculine structure because they don't feel like they can trust their family members. So, I mean, it's kind of that balance of like, well, Hannah wouldn't necessarily know if she could or couldn't for sure be able to trust the people around her unless she kind of started to let her guard down a little bit. However, part of that is probably Hannah's intuition telling her that, okay, she has to be the strong one. As long as Hannah really stays in that place of always having to be the giver and never letting her guard down, she's gonna keep attracting people who are chaotic, who are wounded, who need her to mother them into her life. Now, her family is her family. We can't change our parents, and, you know, she has sisters and things like that is family, but she's obviously continuing to attract the same type of man into her life as well. And she's a mother now, so, you know, those kind of attitudes and that kind of behavior is probably going to get projected onto her kids. There's an interesting moment too where, like, even Hannah's father, when the mother starts drinking and having issues, he calls Hannah. Like, the parents even rely on Hannah, and Hannah kind of sort of reflects on her parents and the fact that they were basically these like philandering actors that liked the idea of having children but didn't actually want a parent, and how Hannah doesn't blame her parents because that's all they've ever known. And that's actually a point that I want to make, is that when I talk about these dynamics and these energies and things, most of us are in the state that we're in, wounded, healed, whatever energy that we're in, whether it is our core energy or not, because that's all we've known, right? I mean, most of these things have been a survival mechanism for us, and they're things that many of us have had to do over the years, and there are things that in some cases we just didn't know anything else. I don't want people to get into the idea of blaming yourself for doing the things that you felt like you had to do in order to survive. The idea is to say, okay, here's where I am now, here's the way things look now, and how do I move forward to get the things that I actually want? And that's where I think it's important. There's a lot of other aspects to this movie. There's a lot of like hypochondriac issues and things like that, but I just kind of wanted to touch on those few little areas, because watching this movie as kind of, I mean, the movie itself has got a lot of chaos to it, which kind of makes sense because Hannah really is the structure. Hannah is like the constant in the structure throughout the movie, and like everything else is the chaos around her. As somebody who identifies with Hannah a lot, and I'm sure there's a lot of women out there that also identify with that aspect of kind of always having to be the masculine structure and having everybody rely on her, and then feeling like you want to tap into your feminine energy and you want to be able to trust and rely on somebody so that you don't always have to be the masculine structure. But it's difficult to do because that's all you've ever known. I wanted to do something that was kind of a little bit Thanksgiving themed. A lot of these storylines happen on several Thanksgivings because it is, you know, a movie sort of about family and relationships between sisters and things like that. I have a request to do a video about sisterhood wounding. I'll probably do that at some point. But yeah, I just want to do something that had a little bit of a Thanksgiving theme, because I do think Thanksgiving is a little bit of an overlooked holiday this time of year. And I just thought a lot of women would really relate to Hannah's character. So if you haven't seen this movie, after you watch this video, I highly recommend that you watch the movie, see if you can pick up on some of the things that I mentioned. I'm going to try to do some little film clips on TikTok and YouTube Shorts as long as I can do that. Although I couldn't find, there were some really good scenes in this movie that really identified the different energies, like Hannah and Elliot when they're kind of talking about the structure and chaos and things like that. A lot of really great scenes that I couldn't find clips of, and it bugs me. But I'm gonna do my best to put some little film clip breakdowns so you can actually see some of the individual scenes on my TikTok and on YouTube Shorts, if you wanna look out for those. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you wanna connect to your feminine energy, I have online courses, so be sure to check out the description box below for all the links and details, and for links to all my social media accounts. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.